Hello and welcome. Today I'm discussing this stamp set here. This is the My Monthly Hero September 2017 stamp set. I noticed a lot of people were posting videos, 10 cards with one kit, and I thought that was kind of an interesting challenge, so I decided to participate. So I'm sharing my 10 cards with you today. The two main images in the stamp set is a pumpkin and a sunflower, so I decided to make 5 cards with the pumpkin and 5 cards with the sunflower. I'm going to share my pumpkin cards first. I hope you find these ideas interesting. If so, please subscribe to my blog, which I'll put a link below, or to the YouTube, or both. Leave a comment. It would just be nice to know that someone saw this. And let's get started. We're going to do the pumpkins first, and these are layering stamp sets. And the stamp set did come with, or the kit did come with a few inks, but I had a really hard time finding something that I liked with those, so I decided to go into my stash and pull out some of the yellows and oranges that I had. And here are the colors that I'm using. For the large pumpkin, I'm going to use Stampin' Up's Morning Marigold, then the second layer Pumpkin Pie, the third layer Tangerine Tango, and then for the smaller pumpkin, just because I wanted to look a little different, the last layer I'm going to use Really Rust, just to make it a tiny bit darker. And I'm going to stamp a couple of these at once just to save time. We'll use them on different cards. So here's the first layer, which is Morning Marigold. I'm going to do 3. I probably will have to do more at some point, but I'll start here. And the second layer is Pumpkin Pie. I found these to be pretty easy to line up. I didn't have any issues. The bottom part of the pumpkin and the top part are pretty distinct. Oops. And then the last layer I'm going to use Tangerine Tango. And again, these are all Stampin' Up inks. I think if you had, that was the company I had the most from, but I think no matter what company inks you have, I'm sure you can find stuff in your stash that will work to make beautiful pumpkins. So there we have 3 bases, and the stamp set did come with dies, but in order to use the dies, you have to stamp the pumpkin and the stem separately, die cut them, then you would glue them together. And to be honest, I didn't really care for the white line that it put around the stem, because then you ended up with this white line in your pumpkin. So I decided that even though it was a little more work, I was going to fussy cut my pumpkins. And I didn't get the greatest impression there, but I'm not too worried about it because I'm going to put the chocolate, I'm going to stamp this in chocolate chip on top. That was crumb cake. And then the second layer I'm going to do in chocolate chip, and I don't think you'll even be able to notice that it didn't stamp perfectly. It's one thing about layering stamps is that they're very forgiving. Perfect. So those are 3 big pumpkins. And while we're stamping, I'm just going to do 3 smaller pumpkins. I thought it was important to show this step because this whole stamp set is based on layering. And I'm only going to do 2 smaller pumpkins. And this way, if you're new to layering or new to the stamp set, you'll have some idea, or at least saw what I did. Doesn't mean I did it. Yep. That's the pumpkin pie layer. And lastly, like I said, I did, instead of Tangerine Tango, I used Really Rust just to make them look a little different. like that it's a little darker. Perfect. All right, I'm gonna go fussy cut these out and I'll be back. Okay, I'm back. I have all my pumpkins fussy cut. I am going to set those aside because the next thing I'm going to work on is the greeting. And what I did was I die cut an oval. And it just was with my Spellbinders dies, and then I put the oval inside of my MISTI because I wanted to make sure I got a good impression. And I took one of the sentiments that says "You are gorgeous," and I put that in the MISTI. Now let's look at the stamp set again. If you notice, the sentiments in this stamp set have a slight curve to them, and I think they were doing that on purpose so it would, you know, go around the pumpkin or the edge of the sunflower. But personally, I just wasn't a huge fan of this arch, so I found that if I put it my MISTI and use the grid lines, I could straighten that out or stretch the stamp to straighten it out a little bit and make it straight. And now I'm going to ink up my stamp and just stamp my sentiment. I'm just using a brown ink. It happens to be Stampin' Up's chocolate chip, but any brown ink will work. I'm just stamping it a couple times so it's nice and dark. Sorry, my MISTI doesn't fit under this camera setup, but there you go. So it says "You are gorgeous." I had this embossing folder that is made by Paper Studio. I probably bought it at Hobby Lobby. I'm not 100% sure. I don't know the name of it, but it has like these swirls in it, and I really liked it. So I embossed a piece of cardstock with that. It's beautiful. Love that texture. And I'm going to take a piece of twine and I'm going to wrap it around the bottom of the cardstock and tie it. And because this is embossed, I don't like to use, I've been getting away from using my tape runner anyway. I've really fallen in love with this this liquid glue by Tombow. I think it holds better and it gives just a little bit of time, so if you need to reposition it. I've had a lot less problems with my cards coming apart since I started using this. I'm going to glue this just to a white card base. Okay, now I'm just going to take a little bit of Fun Foam, and I had green and I thought that kind of fit the time of year, and I cut 2 strips. And I'm just putting a little bit of that glue, and I'm going to kind of create a channel on the back of my oval sentiment. I'll put glue on this side. Must be getting low. I have to keep shaking it to get it to come down. And then I'm going to place my sentiment over that string so that twine runs through that channel. And once this dries a little bit, I can play with that twine and arrange that so it's not covering up that sentiment. But I want to give that a second to dry. And while it's doing that, I'm going to take one of my larger pumpkins and put some adhesive on the back of it. And I am going to tuck that in here and glue that down. And now I'm just going to play with this bow just a smidgen, just so I get it to lay the way I want. I can play with the way this string lays a little bit. Actually, I think that's good, and that's going to be card 1. Alright, now I'm getting started on card number 2, which is also going to be a pumpkin, and I decided I wanted to add a background to the paper. So I had this background stamp. It's from Stampin' Up. I took it off the wood. It's called Antique Cracking. It is ancient. I'm sure if you really liked it, you could find something similar from another company or on eBay. I know I've seen a few on eBay in the past, but I'm just going to add some texture to this paper using this background. And I just like that it kind of breaks it up. I'm going to do 2 of these, not because I need 2 for this card, but I'm also planning on using this one other time in the Sunflower series. So while I have everything out, I'm just going to do it, and I'll set it aside. I'm all about saving time. All right. So I cut out this frame from white cardstock. I think the frame is by My Favorite Things. And my hope is I'm going to position a pumpkin and a gourd here, the sentiment, for the card. But I don't want to have to cut out all of these pumpkins. So what I'm going to do is stamp the pumpkins directly onto the cardstock. So I'm going to try to work backwards and see how this goes. This might be a total disaster, but we're going to take top of the pumpkin. And we're going to layer backwards. So now we're going to do chocolate chip. I'm going to take my pumpkin base and start working my way up. Stamping these the same way I did the pumpkins in the earlier video, or earlier part of this video. Really good. It's always amazing to me when you get to the last layer of each of these sets and you put it on, it just all of a sudden pops and comes to life. So now I can save one of those ones I made earlier, and I am going to use one of these baby ones that I cut out already just to layer right on top. So there we go. Now before I do anything else, I can't stand images when they just float. It's a pet peeve of mine. So I'm going to take 2 Copic markers, W3 and W1, and all I'm going to do is, and I actually might even glue this little Gordon down, because I'm just going to put in a little ground so that they're sitting on something. And it's not meant to be a focal point, it's just meant to make it look like we don't have pumpkins floating in the middle of our card. There we go. And just be careful that you're not touching the marker to the stamped image for many reasons, but the biggest one is that ink is not Copic safe. It will smear with the alcohol, and we certainly don't want that whole mess. Now I'm going to go ahead, and my MISTI doesn't fit on my workspace here very well with the camera. The tripod that holds it gets in the way of the MISTI. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stamp my greeting underneath. I'm going to do the same greeting that I did before, "You are gorgeous," and I'll be right back. Okay, now that I have the sentiment stamped, I'm going to add the ribbon to the bottom. So I just cut a piece of green ribbon. And I decided not to do a bow because I wanted this to be a card that could go to, like, gender neutral. I didn't want it to be feminine. So I'm just going to tie a knot. I have a piece of olive cardstock that I'm going to mat this frame with, and I'm going to try this a couple different ways, and I think this works the best. I'm going to kind of put the frame down and center it where I want it, and then I'm going to put adhesive in the middle, and then stick my panel in here. And then I'm going to pull out this outer frame. And while this is drying, I use this all the time. It's a stack of Post-it notes just to hold that down. And while it's drying, I'm going to put some glue here around the edges. And I'm just going to put a little bit because I don't want it to leak out the sides and show glue everywhere. So I'm just putting a thin line. Then I will reposition the frame over that panel. Put my Post-it note back And while that's drying, I'm going to take my card base and I'm going to take one of the backgrounds we created earlier, and I'm going to glue this panel onto my white card base. And in this case, I decided to use a side fold card. It doesn't really matter. It's whatever you like. There's that. And then lastly, we will put glue onto this green panel. And center that into this card. And card number 2 is done. Alright, welcome back. We're going to do card number 3. I die cut a piece of white cardstock into a square. It has like a stitched border along the edge, and I'm going to do something similar to the last card. I'm going to stamp the large pumpkin here and put a second pumpkin, but I would like to do some greenery around the pumpkins on the side. So I'm going to go do what I did last time. I'm going to speed this up so you don't have to watch it all over again. Alright, and again, I just did this in order to save the step of having to cut this out. And now I want to introduce some of greenery, and the stamp set came with a couple, I don't know, for lack of better words, vines in it. I'm not sure if that's the right terminology there, but we're going to use those. Sorry, a couple stamps fall off that plastic sheet. And I'm going to stamp them in Stampin' Up! Ink. Pear Pizzazz I'm going to use is my lighter green. I'm going to ink that up really well. And I'm going to do some real informal masking here. I'm just going to hold this over the pumpkin, stamp the greens, the light ink, and then I'm going to use Old Olive to stamp the darker ink on top. I love that they did layering sets, or did layering parts for all the elements, most of the elements in the stamp set. So that kind of gives us some vines. And I'm actually really tempted to leave that as it is. Maybe, I don't know, I do like that little gourd in there too. I think I am gonna put the little gourd in. Obviously you can do what you'd like. Just like that it adds that little extra depth to it. Hides the end of the vine so it looks a little bit more finished. And I am going to go ahead and use my Copic markers W3 and W1 again to add just a little bit of ground in here. Just so my pumpkins don't look like they're floating. And then I'm going to stamp a sentiment at the bottom. I think I'm going to stamp I am grateful. Using my Misty to do that. And I'm going to straighten the sentiment out again, just like I did the last one, because I don't know, I don't care for the curves that they put in them. So now we have a sentiment stamped on our panel, and I'm going to go ahead and set this aside and work on my card base. What I have done is I have taken a blue piece of cardstock and I embossed it with a die, which is something I don't do very often, but this die is just really intricate and I think it's really pretty embossed. It's by Tim Holtz. So I embossed that onto this panel, and I'm going to glue the panel onto a top fold white card base. I cut a piece of chocolate chip paper that I'm going to create a band with across the card, and I do this just because I like to anchor down my panels. I don't like when they just float in general, so I don't do this all the time, but I do it often. And then I'm going to glue that panel we created, that little square, on. And I thought this card just needed a little embellishment, so I took that same twine we used in card 1 and I cut a little piece and made a bow, and I'm going to use a glue dot to hold the bow onto the pumpkin. And then I'm going to trim the ends just so they're not out of this control. And card number 3 is done. Okay, to start card number 4, I die cut another square. This is smaller than the last one. Here's the last card, so it's quite a bit smaller. And I had the idea of stamping the sentiment at the bottom and then having the pumpkin kind of hang off of that panel. So I just added a little bit more dimension. So I'm using my Misty to stamp the autumn greeting sentiment onto the bottom part of that square panel. And I'm having to stamp it a couple times just so I can get it nice and dark. Awesome. And I did that in chocolate chip, and I straightened it out like I did the other ones. And I'm going to use one of those pumpkins I cut out in the beginning to place that above, and then I like how the stem kind of hangs off the top of that panel. So I'm going to create a ground for this pumpkin to sit on. Again, I'm using W3 and W1 of my Copic markers to do this. And I mean, all I'm doing, this is really simple. You could do this with colored pencils, you could do this with a little bit of sponging in your ink. You could probably think of about 10 ways to do it. And you know what, I don't know if it needs to be done. It's just my personal preference to try to ground my images. So there we go. So we have our pumpkin, and it's hanging off the top of that panel just a little bit, but I just think it adds a tiny bit of interest to that. And I went through my embossing folders and I was looking for some other ideas, and I forgot I had this. I don't know who makes it. And for these fall colors, I was really liking the bright of the orange, so I was trying to do a little bit of white on white. I'm going to glue this panel down to a top fold card. It's a great way to use embossing folders. It's nice for clean and simple cards. Okay, set that aside to dry. And I also found in my scrap bin a piece of orange, it's pumpkin pie paper. I'm going to glue that to the back of my panel, and I'm going to have it hang off. I'm going to center it with a little glue. But I want that to hang off. The edges are... And then on the back, I'm going to take some fun foam and pop this up. And you might be asking why I'm using fun foam instead of pop dots. You can use pop dots. I just had heard and had seen other stampers say that fun foam mails better than pop dots. So I started buying fun foam. It's probably the same price as dimensionals. I don't think it's a cost saver, and in some ways it's a little bit more of a pain in the butt because you have to add glue to the back. But if you spend all these time on cards, you want to make sure that they arrive in the way you sent them. Alright, so then I'm going to adhere that to this card base, and card number 4 is done. Welcome back to the 5th card in the pumpkin series. This time I decided I wanted to do another background stamp, and I'm going to use browns again. It's perfect for fall. I found another background stamp in my stash. This is also from Stampin' Up. It is called Canvas, I believe. Again, it was wood mounted, and I took it off the wood. And I'm going to ink it up with Crumb Cake. I'm going to put a piece of crumb cake cardstock. So we're just going for tone on tone on top. And we're going to stamp that background. And I'm going to set this to the side. And okay, now that I have that background stamped, I'm going to sponge all the way around the edges. I just think this helps add some interest and depth to the card. You could do this with Distress inks. I just already had the chocolate chip out. I've been trying to use the same supplies or same group of supplies for all these cards so that if you're doing this at home, you can see that you don't need to have a ton of supplies in order to make a nice set of cards. Kind of just, it adds a nice little distress look to the panel. Okay, I'm stamping another pumpkin onto this square using the same colors I've used on all the other pumpkins. I'm going to speed this up so you don't have to watch every step. Okay, now that we have that pumpkin stamped, I'm going to go ahead and emboss the sentiment on top of it. I'm using Versamark ink, and I'm using the Autumn Greetings sentiment. And I'm going to stamp that over the pumpkin. Oh wait, I almost forgot. I always almost forget this step. I'm going to treat this with my anti-static tool. So hopefully none of that ink, and I'm trying to get a lot of it on there, will stick to the pumpkin. None of the embossing powder, I should say, will stick to the pumpkin. So there's that. And I'm going to use gold embossing powder. On top of it. And then let me heat set this and I'll be right back. Okay, so now we have Autumn Greetings on top of that pumpkin. It's a nice pretty gold. I'm going to put all this away and we can assemble our card. I cut a 1-inch chocolate chip strip that I'm going to put onto the card panel, and this will help anchor our square down. Again, just helps with that idea of things floating on your card. And put adhesive on the back of our panel. Most important thing is to line up that paper with the folded edge of your card. I have a little bit of white here, but I'm just going to take my paper trimmer and trim that off. And then I'm going to take a glue dot, put that at the top of my pumpkin, and I'm going to take another one of those bows I made, trim the ends. I try to always add things in groups of 3. I think I like that placement. Alright, now to start the sunflower cards. I already have stamped the sentiment using my MISTI. Again, I straightened out the sentiments so they do not have the arc in them. And now what I'm going to do is use So Saffron to stamp the first layer of the sunflowers. And the reason I stamped my sentiment first, which I know is a little unusual, usually you do the image, your focal points first and then you add your sentiment, is that I want to be able to build a pattern around, almost like a pattern paper around the sentiment. And I want this to be in the center of the card. So I'm just, wherever I feel like, stamping sunflowers to fill in some of the space. And this light yellow ink. Go on the corners. Awesome. Alright, so now I'm going to put So Saffron away and the bottom layer of the sunflower. And now I'm going to use Daffodil Delight, which is also Stampin' Up, for the second layer. And these can be lined up accurately. There's a notch here, and then there's a notch here on this stamp. If I put it over here, you can probably see that notch better, and line that up like so. However, I was playing around with this when I was trying to figure out what colors to use and whatnot, and I just don't feel like it makes that big of a difference. So what I kind of just decided I wasn't going to fret a whole lot about perfect alignment. Maybe if you were die cutting this, it would be a bigger deal, but we're not doing that today for this card, so I'm not worried. Now, there's not a huge difference between Daffodil Delight and So Saffron, and especially on the camera, but it really does add depth because there's a light yellow and then you have this deeper shade. And once we add the last layer, I think you'll see that it does kind of all come together, and I'm really pleased with these color choices. All right, so no more Daffodil Delight. Putting the second layer of the sunflower away, and now we're pulling out this third layer. And I'm using more mustard from Stampin' Up. And again, I'm not fretting about lining them up. I'm just turning it a little bit so that they're not all going to look the same. Oh, just a bit of depth up here. And now we have the 3 layers of the sunflower stamped. We need to do the middle layers. And I am going to use crumb cake for the bottom layer of the middle. And again, these are super easy to line up. And for my last layer, I went back and forth about this. I think I'm going to use soft suede. You can also use chocolate chip. I just wanted to do something different, and I had soft suede sitting out here, so we're going to use soft suede. Perfect. And now we have this beautiful decorative pattern, and we're not done yet. I had this background stamp from the last pumpkin card that we did. So I had the idea, because I felt like this was so white. This is so stark white with those sunflowers, a way to tone that down without, you know, making it super busy. So I'm going to ink this up with crumb cake. And I am going to stamp this canvas background on front. And look at the difference. And now it just toned that down. It ties all the images together, and I just love the way that looks. So that was a really good experimental moment. And lastly, I'm going to stamp some leaves here, and I think this will help ground the sunflowers a little bit. There's this single stamp that has a bottom to it, but the bottom has a vine, and I didn't really want the vine on here, so I'm just going to use the top part, and it just adds a pop of green to the card, which I just love. Sorry if I got off camera there for a second. Just adding leaves, filling in space.
Are you recording?
Yes.
All right.
That would be yes. All this will now have to be edited out. Thank you, Connor.
Love you, Chris.
Are you done now? Okay. All right, and that is it for the green. Just love the way that looks. All right, the next step is we are going to take a die cut. I actually took 2 of my dies and I used painter's tape to tape them together so I can create a frame. And I'm going to center this on this panel and die cut this, and I'll be right back. Okay, as a result of my die cutting, we ended up with 3 pieces here that all fit together. What I suggest is, if you're doing this at home, is that you figure out, like I had that piece upside down. You don't want to start gluing and figure out that you have one of the pieces upside down, because that will not be good. What we're going to do now is glue this to a card base. So keeping all the pieces right side up, I'm going to add glue to this frame, the outer frame first, and slide that into place. And then what we are going to do is take the inner frame and lay it down, but we're not going to glue it. And then we're going to put the glue into the center. This is going to serve as a placeholder so we can put this center panel where we want it. And then we can pick this frame back up. We'll set this piece aside to dry, and we are going to add some adhesive and some foam to the back of this frame. So I just cut a piece into strips, putting down a line of glue and then just laying the foam into it. And I'm going to do that all the way along and place that panel back into the card. Now I have a little bit of foam that was hanging out. I want to make sure all the foam is hidden. So not sure what the name of this technique is. I guess some people are calling it an eclipse. I've seen that with letters. I'm not sure if that's true, if we still name it that way of a frame. Now I'm noticing I almost made my mistake. Do you see how my sunflowers didn't line up? Glad I caught that before the glue dried. I got my frame upside down. I'm putting a little more adhesive on. Alright, let's see if we can put this together properly. Alright, that looks better. All your sunflower parts should line up, so your center should be here. That was close. Alright, so that looks much better. Sorry about that. And then while I have the glue out, I'm just going to put 3 little drops of glue into that center panel, and I'm going to drop a sequin into each one of those. Just for a splash of gold. That really pops off of these fall cards. The hardest part is getting the sequin to stick to the card and not me. And this is card number 1 of the Sunflower series, or card 6. Alright, working into card number 7, I'm going to stamp some more sunflowers. I'm going to speed through this because I'm using the same colors I did before until I get to the very end, and I'm going to show you what I'll do. I'll slow it back down then. But right now I'm just creating more sunflower paper. Okay, now we have all the sunflower parts stamped except for the last layer of the center. And what we're going to do is gold emboss this layer. I think it'll just add a pop of color. I really like the way the gold is interacting with the other colors. It's just really creating this really cool look. So we're going to add a gold center to each of these sunflowers. Okay, so I have the embossing stuff out again. And I'm going to ink up the center of this sunflower in Versamark. And I just realized I forgot to do my anti-static tool. Alright, well, we're just going to have to hope and pray that this doesn't create a mess. And I'm just stamping it into each of the sunflowers. I hope I did. I may have forgotten a flower, but I can always go back and add it. And I'm just pouring some of the gold, same gold embossing powder I've used on the other cards. And shaking off the excess. And I did have a little bit stick, but I think I can use a paintbrush to knock that off. All right, I'm going to heat emboss this. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. I heat embossed it, and also while it was up, I die cut it using a border from, I believe this is My Favorite Things. And so now I have two pieces here. I'm going to take the larger piece and glue that down to a piece of cardstock. And I had prepared this earlier, a sentiment strip. Used the autumn greeting sentiment. I added 2 brads to the end of it. I just didn't want this video to be forever long, and I figured those are all things that people could see and have done. Oops. So I'm just adding some sentiment to the, some adhesive to the foam. And I'm going to place that towards the bottom, but even with this edge of the card. And just to finish this off, I'm going to take a glue dot and one of these small bows that I made earlier and place that here and trim these ends. And card 7 is complete. Card number 7. Okay, welcome to card number 8. I've die cut the words thank you. This is a Hero Arts die, and I'm going to build my card again around the sentiment. So the first thing I'm going to do is just take some glue and glue my sentiment down to my cardstock. And this way I know I have enough room for the sentiment and I can build the rest of the card around this. I think I'm just going to add a couple sunflowers. I'm going to keep this one very, very simple. And I'm going to stamp the sunflowers the same way I stamped the other one, so I will speed this up so you're not bored to death. Okay, now that I have this panel stamped, I'm going to add, or run it through, I should say, my embossing folder. This is one that's by Cuttlebug. It's a bunch of scales. It kind of reminds me of an alligator skin. I don't know why. That's just me. I have no idea what the official name is, but it's a bunch of just squares. I'll show you the paper once it's embossed. I think that'll be easier to see. So I'll be right back. Okay, I love what that does to the paper. It takes something that was very simple and just adds that little bit of interest in, I don't know, just makes something pop. And I really, really like that about embossing folders, especially when you have something very simple like that. And now I'm going to take my adhesive and glue this card together. And then just to add a tiny bit of bling, I'm going to put a couple sequins on this card. And there you go. Card number 8 is finished. Okay, welcome to card number 9. All right, for card number 9, I wanted to do something a little bit different. I got the idea off of Pinterest. They were using some other stamps to do this, and I thought, I wonder if this stamp set would work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a Post-it note to mask off a little bit of this square, and I'm going to use the bottom layer of that sunflower, and I'm inking this up in a light brown. It's crumb cake, and I'm going to stamp on the square so that I get a half circle. And before I pick up my mask, I'm going to ink up the second layer of the sunflower in a dark brown, and in this case I'm using soft suede, and I'm going to stamp on top of that. And then the center of the sunflower I'm going to also stamp in crumb cake. And when I pull this off, I get this little half circle looking thing, which doesn't look like much right now, but hopefully when we're done it looks like a little hedgehog. And I thought that was a cute idea, or a cute way to use this stamp. I love the way it looks, and I thought, I wonder what other animals we could make. I'm only going to do the hedgehog now, but I'm like, I wonder if you could make like a lion. That might be cool. Or use this for a sun. So there's lots of different ways I think that you can use this. This is just a fun thing to try out. Okay, I found, went through all my critter stamp sets, and I found something that kind of looks like two eyes and a nose. So I'm going to go ahead and stamp that right here. Kind of brings that guy to life. Zoom in a little more. Then I'm going to try, I found a grass stamp in my stash of stamps, and I'm going to use some old olive to stamp some grass so it looks like he has a ground and isn't just floating. And I'm going to use the edge of a Post-it note in order to get, I don't want his whole face to be covered in grass, so I want the grass blades to kind of go around him. So a little bit, but I didn't want to go overboard. And I'm going to stamp a couple times without re-inking to get some depth so it looks like I think that looks pretty good. I think he looks like he has some ground now and isn't just floating there. There's a little white space right here. Maybe I'll add. Just trying to, like I said, build a scene here with these stamps. I really like how that turned out. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to stamp a sentiment using stamp set. Let's see, what should we have it say? Let's have it say Hello Sunshine. And I'm going to try using a block for this instead of my Misty and see how it goes. I'm going to try to uncurl these stamps yet again. And I'm going to stamp it once onto scrap paper to make sure before I do my good paper that it looks okay. And I think it does. So we're going to put Hello Sunshine down here at the bottom. Very nice. So there you go. There's our little front panel, and now to finish the rest of the card. Okay, to put this card together, I'm going to take that background stamp that we made way back on card number 2, and I am going to tape or adhere the ribbon around this card base. Trying to get it on there somewhat straight. Then I'm going to glue that to a side fold, or actually I'm sorry, top fold card. Give that a second to dry, and while that's drying, I'm going to put adhesive on the back of that white square that we made and glue that to a scallop square that I die cut using a Spellbinders die. So glue that down, and then I'm going to glue this to our card base. And just to finish this off, I have a glue dot and I made a little ribbon to stick on the side and trim up my ends when card number 9 is complete. I hope you like the little hedgehog guy. I thought he was cute. And I'm so pleased to know that the Hero Art set is able to achieve the same look as that other set. This way I do not have to purchase another stamp set. So this is card number 9. Welcome to card number 10. Alright, for card number 10, we're still going to continue on with this non-traditional theme, and I'm lining the bottom of my paper up with a grid line on my mat so that I know where the center is and where straight is. This is going to help a lot with stamping this card. I'm going to use the bottom layer of the sunflower, and I'm going to use a very light green, and I'm going to ink this up. I'm going to stamp this towards the top center of my paper. Okay. Then I'm going to ink it up again. Now I'm going to rotate the stamp 90 degrees and I'm going to stamp again on top. And I'll explain why I'm doing this here in a second. I'm going to get the other layer down to see if you recognize what I'm building here. So then the next thing I'm going to do is go to the second layer of the sunflower. And I'm going to use the olive green that we used on the other cards to stamp the second layer. Do you recognize that? Does it look like a Christmas wreath? I thought that was pretty cool. The reason I stamped the other one twice is I tried doing it only once and it didn't look full enough. It looked bare, and I thought it looked more like a wreath doing it this way. So that was the reason for the second stamping of the first layer. And I rotated it so that obviously that the petals wouldn't match up when we got more of that effect. Alright, so now I went through my stash and I found this little dot. I have absolutely actually no idea what this is for, but we're just going to use it to add berries. And I don't know, I always imagine that these berries are in like clusters of 3. So I'm kind of just going around the wreath adding berries here and there until I think it looks full. Okay, I like that. It's actually a little too symmetrical, so maybe we'll add, no, I don't want to add any more because I don't want it to be too many berries. I wish I had spaced them out a little differently, but that's fine. I'm going to line this back up, and there's no Christmas sentiments in this stamp set, so I kind of raided my stash, and I found one that I thought was fitting. And I'm decided to stamp it in red ink. And I'm going to use my grid lines to help get this straight. Okay, it says, may the beauty of the season bring you joy, warm memories to cherish throughout the year. And I really thought that was a nice sentiment for this. Then I die cut a bow from glitter cardstock, and I'm going to adhere that to my wreath. I'm going to flip this over and put glue on the back of this panel, and then adhere this to a green card base. There we go, we have card number 10. I really hope you like this series. I had a lot of fun making these cards. I really hope you will leave me a comment. If you have any constructive criticism, I'm all ears. I'd like to play with the lighting a little bit to make that better if I do this again. This set I know wasn't the most popular Hero Art set they've ever released, but I really had a lot of fun with it. I didn't have a set like this in my stash, and it was really a lot of fun, and I enjoyed the challenge, and I think I would do it again. So thank you for hanging in there with me this long, and have a crafty day.